Okay, so welcome along everybody. Thanks for coming to today's writing circle. The Queensland University of Technology acknowledges the Turrbal and Yugara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. We recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. All right, so today's resources are up on Blackboard, the slides, that is, and you can access those. So they're on Blackboard. You can access those now or later. So today's a writing circle. We also have workshops, as most of you would know. There's a little bit of a difference. The workshops are looking at the theory and the principles. We have peer discussion in breakout rooms, and there's a lot of information. Writing circles are more interactive with the exemplars and practical activities and checking your own writing. Okay, so writing circle today. So just some questions to get you started to think. Take a minute, if you can, just to jot down your data collection tools, your data analysis methods. Maybe you've already analysed your data, maybe you're still planning to. If you can write those down, we will use them a little bit later. We'll come back to these questions. And also today, I just wanted to quickly ask you guys a poll. Which actually, one second. No, it's not going to work for me. That's okay. That's okay. So what I wanted to ask you is who's doing thesis by publication? Who's doing by monograph? Is there anyone doing creative works? So if you want to pop that into the chat for me, that'll give me an idea of, you know, oh, yep. So already we've got the first three were different. So that's good. All right. So a lot of, okay, lots of by publication, lots of monograph. We had one creative works. Okay, awesome. Well, that's good. That's good because we're going to be talking about strategies for both, or all three, actually. All right. So this is what we're looking at today, presenting your research in a clear way and critically discussing and synthesizing your research results. So that's the discussion section, and that's using your evidence. So we've got this welcome part now. We're going to look at some key terms, and you're presenting the research results, the synthesizing and the critical discussion section. And we've got two exemplars as well, and a Q&A at the end, as we always have. So if you want to know more, a couple of weeks ago, we had a HDR writing workshop about writing up your thesis. And basically, this is a little bit of a continuation on from that. It doesn't matter if you didn't go to the workshop, though. And I'm just going to pop in the chat. That's where you can find the workshop that we had, writing up your thesis, the resources from that. We've got some upcoming sessions on coherence, writing your introduction and conclusion. So they will go nicely with this writing circle as well. And of course, we've got our Blackboard resources, which is basically the recordings from everything we've done in semester one. If you want to come to those upcoming events, you can go into HiQ. And that's the link for it here. All right. So what came out of that writing workshop, or one of the things, was there was a lot of questions about your candidature and how everything works, and the thesis submission process and all those sorts of things. So the best place to go, rather than to me for those questions, is to HiQ under your candidature. That's where all the information is. Okay. Those research student pages are here. Popping that into the chat as well. All right, so that's where you can go for all of that information about the guidelines for your thesis, for editing, the examination process, and for all those 3 different types of thesis that everybody's doing. The develop research and career skills section is where you find all the upcoming events. And see how I've circled engage with industry? That is because soon you're going to be finished and you need to start thinking about your next steps. And so there's a lot of good, not just information, but activities and events around engaging with industry that are really good to know before you get to the very end of your candidature. This is the sort of engagement opportunities, how to get involved. There's training sessions, and there's a whole lot of opportunities there. So I really recommend, when you have a little bit of spare time, or even schedule it into your time, to go and have a look at that, because it is new. So the other thing that I think is really important, and I talk about every time, is ePrints. That's where you can go and find examples of other people's work. All right, and you can see there, you can choose the thesis format. That's where today's exemplars are from. So really good way to have a think about how you're going to present your results and your discussion. Use those as a guide. All right, so did you open up the Univent reminder email that was sent yesterday? Hopefully, yes. Please do open those. Thanks, Zoe. Please do open those emails, because that's where we tell you what's going to be happening in the session. So it had the activity sheet. The exemplars, as I said, are from QUT ePrints. There's 2 of those. And also, maybe if you can, have your own writing handy. A couple of times we're going to look at your own writing, just do a double check of a few bits and pieces there. Now, does anybody not have that Word document? Because I can pop it. I can put it into. Doesn't look like anyone doesn't have it. If you do, let me know in the chat, and I'll pop it into the chat. Lisa doesn't. Okay, hang on a second. You're just going to have to give me 1 minute to just grab it. All right, let's keep moving. So some key terms and basics. So we're not talking about the methods chapter today, but of course it's completely linked to your findings and results. So just very broadly, your research design is the whole setup of how you've done everything to do with your research. Of course, the methodology is the philosophy behind how you've collected your data. So are you qualitative or are you quantitative? Or, as we know, maybe doing mixed. Some people might be doing that. So very broadly, qualitative researchers perceive that reality is subjective and socially constructed. So we're looking at interviews, focus groups, observations of people doing activities or whatever in their normal way. Quantitative researchers, of course, are looking at experiments and surveys, controlled observations, and their perception is that reality is objective and measurable. So clearly quite different, but of course now lots of people do mixed methods, so combining the 2. So it has to be very clear about how the 2 are being combined in your research design, of course. We're going to look at that a bit later too. So a lot of what we're thinking about today and discussing is to get you planning and confident and really getting some good strategies to feel good about writing these particular sections of your thesis. So your methods, so there's a bit of a hierarchy there, isn't it? So then your methods are how you obtained the evidence. So what instruments did you use, data collection tools, what was your sampling, and how did you analyze the data? So books, books are good. I like books, of course, being a writing teacher. This is a tiny amount of textbooks that are out there to help you with your research design. Obviously, whatever your methodology is, there'll be a whole range of books that you can use. Ask your supervisor to recommend any books that they think is going to help. Not just to plan the research design, but these extend on to how you're going to present and discuss the data as well. So utilize the library. These are ones that I've seen and looked at and used. So they're very good. There's usually a researcher or an author who is sort of the person for different kinds of research strategies and research methods. So for example, Yin, he's the case study guy. I think a lot of people would know of Creswell. He's sort of across all of the methods. Some people love Creswell, some people don't. Check with your supervisor. You don't want to be guided by somebody who they don't like, right? But yes, good idea, use books. So findings and results, which, two different things kind of, except they actually mean the same thing, don't they? This is the dictionary definition. So have a think about the two terms. There's finding a piece of information that is discovered, and result is what you discover as well after examining. So which one are you going to use? The distinction in the past has been that findings is for qualitative, results is for quantitative. As we said, we've got lots of people using mixed methods. So whichever one you choose, my advice is be consistent through the whole thesis, see what your supervisor wants you to say, and also, of course, check the conventions for your own field of study. They are, it seems because they're defined similarly that they would be interchangeable. I wouldn't be interchanging them through your sections, through your findings or results chapter or sections. Choose one and be consistent. Some more terminology. So if you've got a respondent, that's for your survey responses. Participants is for your interviews, case studies, and focus groups. So don't mix those up either. So let's think, remember that we talk about every chapter of the thesis as having a purpose. So very broadly, your research findings or results, you're describing your empirical findings based on what you gathered with your data collection tools. The important bit, which we'll talk about further, is the fact that the results need to be stated without bias or interpretation. Okay, whereas your discussion, you're bringing in the interpretation and really making it clear the value and significance of those findings and how they relate to your research field. Okay, so that's pretty broadly the purpose of both of those parts of your thesis. Can you combine your results and discussion? Nope, you cannot. Why? Because one is without the interpretation, that's the results or findings, and then one is putting in the interpretation. So you've got to report the results without that interpretation first, because the readers need to be allowed to make their own judgments based on your evidence. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have two separate chapters. You might not. We're going to have a look at different options shortly, but you could definitely present the data in one section and then discuss it afterwards, or go with that traditional, here's the findings or results, and then put the discussion in another chapter. So we're going to look a bit more closely at that, but definitely they need to be separated initially, no matter how you're structuring your thesis. Drowning in data. I know I did. I drowned in my data. I hope that you can stay afloat. It is completely normal. So organization is key. I don't know how you guys are going at this point, but usually you can't include everything in the thesis that you collected. It's pretty sad, but you will have to make some hard decisions. And, you know, keep reflecting, be patient, write everything down. Of course, write your drafts and seek feedback to figure out what is helping your argument and what's supporting it, and what perhaps you might need to leave out if you have too much data. Defining what too much data is, you have to work that out. Okay, and it might take time, but you will definitely get there. So keep in mind the whole time while you're doing this writing up about what are your objectives. Remember, you've asked questions to gain new knowledge. So these results, findings, and the discussion sections are getting us to that new knowledge, all right, leading the reader through. So you're looking for all the patterns and the themes and the connections, getting a holistic view, which you got in the lit review. Remember, you got a holistic view of the research field. Now we're getting towards a holistic view of your study and where it fits in that literature. So it's not linear. You're going to be going backwards and forwards, and a bit of wrestling as well. So as I said, completely normal to be wrestling and drowning in that data. Doesn't sound very good, does it? But once those light bulbs start going on, it could be a lot more enjoyable. So we do talk a lot about the fact that your thesis is a story, it's a narrative, and it needs to be a complete whole. So beginning in the middle and the end, maybe you think that the discussion is part of the middle, which is okay. But what I will say is that your findings and your results and then your discussion, they're the highlight of your story. Okay, that's what the reader's waiting for. They play the starring role because that's where the meaning and the significance begins. Those initial chapters are just the prelude, basically. It's introducing all the characters, giving the explanations of why we need to have this research. So the highlight are these findings, results, and then your discussion. So a lot of work needs to go in to make sure that it's really, really clear and that it continues the story. So when you're writing these sections and these chapters, just keep asking yourself, are you telling that clear and explicit story? Are you continuing on the good work that you've done in those initial chapters and being really clear to the reader? So while we're thinking about that complete whole narrative, remember the connections between the chapters. This is going to really help you as well. You know, the chapters aren't being read in isolation, and there's really important links between certain chapters. So obviously your methods and your results, they're linked because the methods that you've explained is how you gained your results. The lit review and discussion, they're mirrors. Okay, so anything that's in the lit review should be somehow mentioned in the discussion, even if it's briefly in the lit review, but then becomes a big element of your discussion, that's okay, and vice versa. But realistically, that's why your lit review is a living document, because it's not till you get to the discussion that you think, okay, have I got everything in the lit review? Do I need to add something? Do I need to take something out that didn't come up? Or rather than taking it out of the lit review, you could mention at least, okay, this was something in the literature, but it didn't come out in my data. All right, so that's what I mean by continuing the story. Of course, your introduction and your discussion are linked, because your introduction, that's where you've introduced the fact that there's a problem. Potentially, that's where you introduced your research questions, and your discussion is answering those initial questions and hopefully gaining insight into the problem as well. So those connections are really important, and that's why we need to go backwards and forwards continually between all of our chapters. So as always, I'm going to ask you to keep seeking feedback, not just from your supervisors, of course, from your peers, from your family, whoever's willing to read, because readability is the key, isn't it, to your clear and logical arguments. If someone says that your point isn't clear or they don't understand, try to breathe and not be too upset. It's not their fault, it's actually your fault, but you can fix it, and that's why we get the feedback, isn't it? So try to reword. Maybe you've got to add a sentence, maybe adding a table or a figure might help. The whole point is, remember that we want the reader to understand what you mean. All right, and honing your proofreading skills is important. Always proofread before you seek feedback. All right, so ultimate readers, examiners. So in that workshop, we talked a bit about what examiners are expecting in the writing up your thesis workshop that I talked about just before. But, you know, the examiners are people, they're interested in your field of study. We've just got to keep that interest with that beautiful linked narrative that you're going to have. So you're informing and persuading them at the same time about the value of your research. So you want that explicit and clear dialogue. So there's no secrets, there's no surprises, there's no twist at the end. Everything is clear and explicit all the way through. And this is some information from some researchers who investigated examiners' practices. They did a systematic review of previous research, and this is a couple of the things that they came up with. The examiners, they tend to judge a thesis quite quickly within the first few chapters. So there's the importance of those first few chapters, but they also want it continued all the way through. They want you to engage with those findings, but they don't want you to go beyond the evidence that you have. And also the literature is underpinning what you've come up with regarding your own data. Of course, we don't want presentation errors. We want good presentation. So we talk a bit about that in that writing up your thesis workshop, and a little bit today as well about the presentation. All right, so let's get into the results and findings. This is the things we're going to talk about. The purpose, getting started, how to structure. We're going to look at some examples, staying on track. All right, let's go. All right, so purpose of your research results and findings. Main purpose, you're reporting what you found. Okay, it's pretty easy. Continuing the research story, as we said, and also it's the observed facts, or if you've done qualitative, it's your participants' perceptions or their experiences. You're reporting them without bias or interpretation. Because as I said before, the reader needs an opportunity to see what they think. Oh, I think Kitty might have put the activity sheet in for me. Thank you. That's Catherine. She's my colleague and she's sitting in the background. So thanks, Catherine. Oh, no, it wasn't. It was somebody else. Oh, great. Thanks, guys. Very good. And someone else in the chat has said that Creswell is their favourite. Yes, he's my favourite too, but I know a lot of people, he's not their favourite. All right, sorry, I digress. So don't forget in those research results and all your findings that we want the reader to see what they think about your evidence, and then you're going to convince them of your interpretation once you get to the discussion. So this is something that's a bit scary, maybe. Initially, those results and findings that you have, they don't prove anything yet, okay? But as you communicate them, you can begin to find what your interpretation is going to be, what do they mean, and where do they fit into the research field, and of course, the contribution that they're going to make. Their value and their significance. So it's still super important that those sections or that chapter or chapters are very clear, and that you lead the reader through, and that you present everything in a clear way. And also, as we said before, there might be data that you have that isn't going to actually help answer your research questions or your hypotheses. So that's where you need to start thinking, do I include this or do I not? And sometimes it's quite a hard decision. Sometimes it's easier than others. So how should we get started on these sections or chapters? Pull out everything that you've had in the, that's come up in the lit review. If they're variables, maybe they're concepts or themes, maybe your data collection tools is one way that you can start. So pull all the things out, the main elements of your research, and potentially that's how you can present. Use that as your roadmap to start, make some subheadings, make some dot points. It'll be a work in progress, but of course that's why we get feedback. Make sure you talk with your supervisors as well, and, you know, just see what they think about what you're thinking. You know, you've got to present it and explain, okay, this is what I think these results mean. And then you can have those really good critical discussions with your supervisors. Sometimes if we do have a lot of raw data, an option is to use the appendices. That's something you can consider. And of course, initially include it all. And then as you go through, you'll find the things that you want to potentially not include in the thesis. And of course, any of that extra data is potentially a research article. So try not to think of it as wasted data. You know, it's all helped to get to you to the point where you're at now. So my advice is get those subheadings, just start writing, write down everything you're thinking, and then the process of polishing it up and getting feedback will get you where you need to be. So when we're thinking about structure, I would say go with your initial thoughts. If you're not up to your data collection yet, I think you should put a plan together as to how you think you might present the data. Plan A doesn't always work, but that's okay. You can then go to plan B, plan C, and onwards. And it's just a matter of restructuring. You know, you've got the information there with your plan A, and then it's just finding the best way that's going to be clearest for the reader. And that can take a little bit of time. There's a lot of different ways. Here's a couple of examples. Multiple phases. Sometimes people have different results and discussion for each phase. We're going to look at an example that does that in a minute. Maybe you're going to organize based on your research questions. That's another way to do it, or your conceptual or theoretical framework. Thesis by publication. So you've probably got 2 or 3 articles that will have their own results and discussion, of course. So somehow you will potentially need to bring them together. And one of the examples that we're looking at today is a thesis by publication. So that might give you some ideas as well. All right, so we are going to look at some examples of how to structure. Look at the examples. Remember, I just showed you the QUT e-prints. And while we are in there, because I'm actually going to go out of the slides, I also want you, because we're going to look at some table of contents to have a look at some structures. So while you're there, while we're there looking at those, have a look at your own table of contents and just see what you think about the subheadings so far. All right, so I'm actually just going to stop my share. Okay, so this is our exemplar 1. As you can see, risk factors associated with infection in patients with chronic leg ulcers. Sorry if I make you dizzy, but I want to go actually down to the table of contents. So this is a thesis by publication. Okay, so what you can see with chapter 1, pretty simple, right? Which is good. Lit review. See, a lot of people ask me about their lit review, about their subheadings, what they should put. And I can't say because everybody's study is going to be different, isn't it? So if we look at this one, it is linked to the content. It's to the topic that's being studied. So everybody's table of contents for their lit review is going to be different. All right, now you notice here, first published article, okay? Then chapter 3, conceptual framework. Whoop. And then we can see chapter 4 here is the methodology, but the methodology for study 1. There's an introduction, it goes on. The 4 previous studies is the data that was used, already collected data from other studies, or data from Queensland Health, I think it was. So this is the bit that we're mainly looking at right now, is study 1. So notice methodology for study 1 and then the study 1 results. Okay, so there's SPSS data analysis there. Study 2 methodology. Study 2 results. There's article 3, article 2 was up here. So see how the articles are in the table of contents. Study 3 methodology. So these subheadings, they're pretty clear, aren't they? You know, they're simple, but we can get them. Study 3 results. So we're up to chapter 9 now. Okay. And then chapter 10, they've put the discussion and the conclusion together. All right. So that's thesis by publication. And you can see here that by looking at the table of contents, we've got enough. We don't know anything about this study yet, but we know that there's 3 studies. We know there's a conceptual framework. The thesis outline here, if we went into that, maybe we can, presented as a thesis by published papers. Chapter 2 presents the lit review, and then there's article 1, it was a narrative review. Chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's not bad. That's pretty good. The table of contents is pretty clear. Okay, let's look at example 2, the impact of a social cognitive teaching strategy on students with learning difficulties. I'm going to go forward to the table of contents. So this is a monograph. Okay, chapter 1, pretty simple. So that's good. Let's have a look at chapter 2. Right, so we've got some good topics that are linking to the whole topic of the thesis. Chapter 3, research design, so fairly normal sort of monograph at this stage. Okay, community of inquiry. So there's a chapter 4. So this is like the theoretical framework that they're using. All right, so now let's have a look at how they've presented their results and their discussion. So chapter 5, results for one part of the thesis. And then they've got, these are their participants. Then we've got another results chapter, but then look here, there's a summary of the main findings, I would assume. Okay, so it's basically the themes and the concepts from their theoretical framework and what they're investigating, isn't it? That's how it's been divided up. There's another chapter 7 now, another results chapter. Then there's a case report. So doing case studies, the researcher has pulled out one specific participant. Then we've got chapter 9 is the discussion, and then have a look. It links to the chapters. Self-regulated learning was one of the chapters. Self-efficacy was one, and reading comprehension was one. And then we've got chapter 10 is the conclusions. Okay. So this is just an example, trying to give you some ideas as to how on earth you're going to present all of this data that you have. Okay. All right, so now, okay, so hopefully also you had a look at your own table of contents while we were looking at that, or that's something you can do later. So another thing to think about that's linked to what we just looked at is considering how your data merges. So as we saw in those table of contents, the way they collected the data was, for instance, the first one, there was 3 studies, wasn't there? So that's the way they ended up presenting the data, and that makes sense. If we were to go in and read that thesis, we would see that those studies were connected. So study 1 helped to inform study 2 and onwards. So they're the sorts of things that you're going to have in your research design or research methods chapter. So what you want to be doing is thinking about, as Sonia just said in the chat, is how do your research questions and your data collection and each step in the research design, how are they linked? Because that's a good tip as to how you might present your results. So let's look at an example. Again, this is just an example and I'm not saying it's perfect, but it gives you a little bit of an idea. What would be the hints here for the thesis structure? So we've got 3 phases, so potentially per phase, maybe. And the trick is to look down the bottom. Phase 1 informs phase 2, okay, and research question 1. Phase 2 informs phase 3. So we already can see straight away that we are going to have to present phase 1 first, aren't we? And then we can say to the reader, okay, phase 1, this was the data here. And what we pulled from that to inform phase 2 was A, B, and C. Okay, and then you would go to your phase 2 and figure out a way to present the data. Now, if we look at the analysis for phase 1, descriptive statistics, so potentially a good way would be to go through those results in order of the survey tool, the questionnaire. Then for phase 2, look at the analysis, it's thematic. So potentially looking at showing the results using the themes that have come up. Where would those themes have come from initially? Potentially the lit review. So that could be a way to do it there. The other thing to look at is the research questions. The problem with going with the research questions potentially could be is look at phase 3. It informs research question 1, 2, and 3. So if you're going to go via the phases, you're not going to really be able to answer the whole of research question 1 just from phase 1. So that could potentially be something, but maybe present the data according to the phases, but then bring all the data together in the discussion to answer the research questions. So I hope that that makes sense. Obviously, you're going to have a completely different design, but if you can come up with something like this, where you are very clear in your mind as to what comes first and how each lot of data collection and how your analysis informs the next one. Now, there's going to be overlaps as well. That's why it becomes quite complicated. And also, of course, you've got to tell the reader all of these things as well and explain why you've presented the data in a certain way and why you've discussed the data in a certain way as well. So a lot of thinking, a lot of big picture thinking, of course, and a lot of strategic discussions with your supervisors and anybody else who will listen to you. Okay. So remember just before how I said to you to write down your data collection tools, your data analysis methods. Have a think to yourself now and later on. Can you organize your structure around these phases or around the tools that you collected the data? Does that make sense? Which data collection tools and analysis are informing the other ones? Because remember, at some point, if we go back, at some point, all of this information and evidence needs to be somehow put together, doesn't it, to form the whole thesis and to have the contribution. So if you can have a think about those couple of things for yourself, for your own, then maybe that'll start to give you some tips. Just going to pop that into the chat and we're going to keep moving and grooving. All right. So potentially you won't be able to go, oh, well, I collected this data and here it is here. I collected this data and here it is here. Potentially it's not going to be as simple as that, but maybe it will be. You might be lucky, but definitely something to think about, because remember, in this results or findings sections and chapters, you have to keep reminding the reader about how you collected this data and how you analysed it as well. Okay. So that's the next topic that we've got now, is keeping the reader informed. You have to always start with a paragraph or sentences, if that is enough, that tells the reader the aim and the function of the section or the chapter, how the data was collected, how it's structured, what can the reader expect. We always talk about this, don't we, for all of our chapters and all of our sections. It's really important. It's important for the reader, who is the important person, of course. All right, so here's an example. This is actually in that activity sheet, if you prefer to look at it there rather than on the slide. So chapter 5, study 1 results. Remember, we just looked at the table of contents. Study 1 was designed to identify the factors associated with clinically diagnosed infection in patients with chronic leg ulcers. Notice how they've put the whole phrase again. They would have said CLUs previously, but they're reminding the reader, just in case we start at this chapter. As outlined in chapter 4, this study involved blah, 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 blah. We've got information there about how the data was analysed, and then it's telling us how the chapter is structured. I've also pulled out there the conclusion to this chapter. This chapter reported the results from study 1 and identified 2 significant risk factor models for clinically diagnosed infection in chronic leg ulcers. Okay, so that's good. It's achieved what it wanted to achieve. The overall discussion is presented in chapter 10. Okay, good. So the reader knows that. Chapter 6 discusses the research methodology for study 2, which aimed to retrospectively evaluate the above relationships and examine the clinical signs. Now, that's the conclusion to the chapter. What are you thinking? It's okay, but I think what would have been good is give us a little bit of an overview of those risk factor models, but potentially that was just explained in the previous section. So maybe that's why. Also, is there anything else that you notice there? Notice, I'll tell you what I noticed. Chapter 10 is written TEN. Chapter 6 is written numerically. So try to make sure that you are consistent with those sorts of things. Now, we haven't really got to my lectures to you about tense, but I want you to notice that last sentence. Chapter 6 discusses the research methodology, which aimed to retrospectively evaluate. So there's a past tense and a present tense in one sentence, which we can't do. All right, so we'll talk about that a bit more later. But I think for this study 1 results, there's a good introduction and there's a little bit of a summary at the end that's quite good as well. Let's look at another one. This is for the exemplar 2. So remember, they had their results in separate chapters as well. Now, just before we go, I just want to quickly come back to this one. This one also, it says there in the middle, this chapter presents the results and findings of study 1, which aim to answer research question 1 and 2. See chapter 4. Okay, so they haven't restated the research questions. I'm not saying what's right or wrong there. You decide for yourself. The reader can go back to chapter 4 and check, can't they? This one, they in fact do restate the research questions. So that's something for you to consider as well. The central question, so that's good. We've got something about the aims at the beginning there. It tells us what the chapter is focusing on. It gives us some information about how the data was collected, and it tells us how there was supplemented by data. Okay. And that 2 representative students, and it goes on, there's a little bit more information there as well. But this is good as well because it's introducing to us what's in the chapter. It's restating the central question so we can, as we read through, we would know if that the data is answering those sub-questions. Okay, so again, with our exemplars, it's just for you to think about and to have a look at your own writing. Okay, so check your document and make sure that you've got those beginning chapter sections or sentences that restate potentially your research questions. We saw not everybody does that. You've got to make that decision. Your research aims, definitely, I would say, and the method, how you got that data and how you analysed it, really, really important. So have a think about if you've told the reader enough information. Now, if you've got only results in sections at this stage, then potentially you've only got a couple of sentences there. If you've got a whole chapter, you might have a paragraph. Okay, like the 2 examples, they had the paragraphs. So tense. Okay, this is why I don't know if you know why I go on about tense all the time. It's because it's a common mistake from everybody. Okay, so really be aware, and it's easy to make errors because tense is about your verbs and you need a verb to make a sentence. So basically there's an opportunity to make an error in every single sentence. So we don't want those errors, do we? So when you're reporting your results and findings, that happened, that data was collected in the past. Therefore, you have to be in past tense. Okay, 10 participants reported something during the experiment. It was observed. Okay, you have to be in past tense. So another good idea in your results or finding sections is using non-textual elements. So that's your figures, your tables, your images, maps. So anything that's not a table is generally a figure. That's the rule of thumb. And they're good because they help the reader gain an overview of what you're trying to say. So make sure you format and present them consistently and correctly according to your referencing style. Use Word to format them, and then you'll be able to generate your list of tables and your list of figures. Let's have a look at some examples. So I want you to notice the formatting there. So this is an example from a study that researched erosion at Currumbin Creek on the Gold Coast. Someone's just asked me a question. Yeah, so someone said that that at the end, that conclusion that we looked at before from our exemplar, it needed to say the thesis will now turn to chapter 6. So to say what's going to happen in the next chapter. My supervisors have suggested to state the significance or argument of the chapter in the introduction. Yes, that's a good thing. Was this clear in the exemplars? I think it was clear to some degree, potentially could have been clearer, but I think it was clear enough for us to as the reader to gauge. See, remember as well that we haven't, when I pull out a section like that or one paragraph, we haven't read the rest of the thesis. And, you know, the writer can assume that there has been at least the abstract potentially read. So there is a little bit of prior knowledge that the usual reader that would have, whereas we don't have that. Look, you know, anything can always be improved later, you know, so I look at my thesis and I think, oh, that could have been better here and there. So so whether, and also the idea of at the end of a chapter saying what's going to be in the next chapter. Some supervisors like that, some supervisors do not like that. So I would double check with them. It doesn't hurt to have a sentence to say the next chapter presents something or does something. I think one sentence is okay. You've just got to go with what you like, what you think is good for the reader, and talk about it with your supervisor. Someone else in the chat has said, is it possible to have mixed tenses in a lit review? No, never, never. Sorry, Jonathan. You can't. It doesn't make sense to use simple past and simple present in one sentence. It's not grammatically correct. Sometimes it's hard to reword it. You use present perfect and past simple, or you use present perfect and past present simple. They go together. That's the way you would fix that. So that example there, Jonathan, let me write it. You can fix that by saying they have suggested that. Yep, and then your present simple works. Okay, you can never put past simple and present simple in a sentence. You either have to use present perfect with the past or the present, or make two sentences. So Rosemary is just saying about the formatting. APA 7 has changed from APA 6. That's why I'm saying to notice the formatting. Figures and tables are now the same. Rosemary is right. They used to be tables on top, figures below. APA 7, which I think I have a link for you for that in a minute. Let me have a look. I'll find that in a second, that link. So figure 3.17, or if it was table, is bold, and then your label is capitalized, no full stop, and italicized. So this is correct for APA 7. If you're using a different referencing style, you'll need to go and check. Let's move on. Presenting statistical analysis. So then you can see there. So that's my writing down the bottom. Most important point is be consistent with the data presentation throughout. So this is from our exemplar 1. Okay. And see how the information is in the middle of the columns and the rows, you would be doing that the whole time. Okay. So be consistent. Think about tense again. Okay, yes, I'm going to keep talking about it. Tables and figures, when you present or introduce them, you need to be in present tense because the reader is looking at them now. When you're talking about what is in the table, you're using simple past or present perfect. We're going to look at some examples in a minute. But why are you in past when you're explaining the table or the figure? Because you collected and analyzed in the past. We can go back to this one. Okay, that one doesn't actually have an introduction. Let me see. We must have. Here we go. Notice the tense. Someone in the chat has said I use APA 6 for my confirmation document. You will need to change to APA 7. Sorry about that, but honestly, APA 7 is easier. It's more simple, okay? It's just going to take you a little time to do all those adjustments. Okay, the tense. Table 5.1 presents the case study participants. 5 participants were female and 3 were male. All were aged between 18 and 22. Now, if you're looking at that and you're thinking, okay, well, they're still male and female, aren't they? They're still, well, actually, they're not. Their age would have increased by now, but that's the rule of thumb, okay? You analyzed and you collected the data in the past. You need to be in past tense, okay? That's the way it is, okay? If you want to do something else, that's fine, but, well, it's not fine, but definitely introducing the table, you need to be in present tense because we're looking at it now as the readers. Okay, so words still matter. Just because you have a figure in a table doesn't mean you can't say anything after. You need to, because if you just show a table or a figure, the reader's like, okay, great, but what am I meant to be looking for? You need to tell them, don't you? We're going to look at an example. Okay, so there's the introduction. The responses are shown below in figure 4.8. Oop, and I've made an error in that. Sorry about that. It should be very true 5, fairly true 4, slightly true 2, not true 1. Sorry about that. Now, there's the table. And then have a look at the explanation below. 3/4 of respondents indicated that they expected course teachers to tell them what to read. Half of respondents thought it was very true or fairly true. These figures corresponded. Maybe that could have been in present tense. Let's have a look. These figures corresponded with the results presented previously, which revealed that many participants expected to receive support from course teachers if they needed help improving. So we couldn't. That has to be in past tense, that sentence. Although we could say these figures have corresponded. Weird. Got to be in past tense. Okay. Because it all happened in the past. Okay, I hope that's clear. If it's not, ask me in the Q&A. I'll explain it again. All right, now you're going to check your document. Are your figures and tables necessary? Do you need to add more potentially? Are they formatted correctly? Do you have explanations below the figure or the table? Or have you just started a new section? Try to really avoid that. I see that a lot. Someone presents a table or a figure and then they go straight into their next section. I wouldn't do that. You're jumping, okay? You need an explanation for the reader to tell us what is it in that table or figure that we need to find. What people often do is they put that explanation above the figure or the table. So just pull that explanation and put it below, and then you'll be good. Also, you can check that you're using the correct tenses. And yep, that note, don't finish a section with a table or a figure. So if you've got transcripts, this is an example of how you might present the transcripts. Now, this one is from a thesis or a research study that used critical discourse analysis. So that's why the lines are numbered. You may not need to go to that detail. It just depends on how your analysis is being done. This one we did need to do that. Obviously, S is for student, T is for teacher. That would have been explained earlier. Now, I think the other thing to notice there, you can see some square brackets. You can see some brackets with some dots. Let's have a look at what those mean, because if you are putting excerpts of transcripts, you do need to tell the reader what your transcription conventions are. Now, these ones have been pulled from and adapted from Richards, 2003. You could use any other author or textbook if you want. But because this used critical discourse analysis, these pauses are important in that kind of analysis. The square brackets, you can see it means the speech overlaps, so they're talking at the same time. But certainly the important thing there is the pauses, because that was something that was analysed as part of the study. Presenting interview data. So you're going to have some short excerpts, you might have some large excerpts. So in APA 7, it's 40 words or more is what is considered large, the same as if you're taking a quote from one of your sources and it's 40 words or more, you put it like this, indented and as a block quote with no quotation marks as well. Notice that. So the first one, writing the short ones into sentences is really good. And then you can see there with the large one, there's a little blurb to start the positive feedback Felipe had received, reassured him that his writing aligned with disciplinary requirements, and he described his approach to writing, and that's indented and in a block like that. So staying on track is something that you want to be able to do with your results, obviously, and your findings. So go back to the literature, stay patient. That story, it's going to take time. those strategic discussions are so important. Look from all the different angles. Sometimes if your participants are students, for example, if you think about the perceptions of maybe other stakeholders like the teachers, that might help you to gain some understanding, or whoever, you know, your research setting is involved in. Do you need to exclude the data? Do you have negative in inverted commas, results that don't support what you thought or are unexpected? Don't discount them straight away. And of course, sometimes it is good to refer to previous sections. That might help the reader as well. So finding the right balance is so important, because you want to report your results and findings without those interpretations, but at the same time, you need to plant some seeds to keep us interested. I'm going to show you an example of that in a second. If you're writing up your results and findings and you find that you're discussing and you're not in the discussion yet, that's okay. Keep going and highlight it and pull it out and put it in your discussion later. Don't ruin your thread while you're on it. So remember this. Remember we have the response frequencies and we have that, the table there, or the figure there, sorry. That highlighted sentence, that's the seed that's planted, that's bringing us towards the discussion. So it's like, okay, half of respondents did this, 3/4 did that. Now, if we left it at that, it's like, okay, great. But as the reader, it's not giving us much, is it? So you just need to give the reader a little bit towards the discussion. So it's connecting to previous results, and it's starting to allude to the fact that the participants thought that their teachers would help them. So that would be something that would be discussed further in the discussion section. So of course you need to find your clear and logical thread. We talk about that all of the time. So that's that going backwards and forwards between your results and your previous chapters, figuring out the best structure and how you can put that thread all the way through. And as you're writing up your results and findings, those themes, those arguments, they should all be emerging to lead towards your interpretation, which is your discussion. All right, so that was a lot of information, I know. We're probably running slightly behind time, but that's okay. So we're going to go through this section and get to our exemplars as quick as we can. So that's what we're going to be talking about, and then we're going to examine the exemplars and bring it all together. So like we looked at the purpose of your results and findings, this is the purpose of your discussion. It's answering your research questions, really, and starting to get those insights into how your study is contributing to your field of study. You're helping to fill the research gaps. You'll need to mention about those that you talked about in your lit review. When I say don't forget about your stakeholders, remember at the end, you're going to have recommendations, aren't you, for your stakeholders or for certain stakeholders to do some actions. So you need to start alluding towards that as well in your discussion. And also starting to think about future research as well. So planting some seeds there. So basically, it's moving backwards and forwards between what you found, what others have found, and how they compare, okay, with that ultimate aim of your research questions and, of course, your contribution. So obviously there is differences between your discussion and your conclusion, but it can be a little bit, or you may well feel that it's a bit repetitive. It's meant to be. Your conclusion is going to really have some repetition from your discussion, but it's going to be summarized and very matter of fact by the time you get to the conclusion. You're restating everything in a really clear way, whereas your discussion is going to be have a lot more information and explanation with the evidence. The conclusion, you shouldn't really need that much evidence. There shouldn't be too many citations from the literature because that's all in your discussion, okay? What do you think about this? You might disagree with me. You might think the discussion that the conclusion is where your destination is. I would argue that your discussion is, because that's where everything comes out. That's where you answer the research questions. That's where you put your insights to solve the problem. It's where you've been heading this whole time. And it demonstrates your entire research skills. Everything all comes together. So there's a couple of questions in the chat. I do want to keep moving. Is there always a comma before a short quote? You can decide for yourself. Just be consistent. My supervisors want to have findings and discussion in the same chapter. That's fine, as long as they're different sections. Perfectly fine. But you need to present the findings and then discuss them after in different sections. But in the same chapter, no problem. So getting started, don't wait. What are you waiting for? Start writing. Write dot points with your subheadings. Think about how you're going to structure. Try to keep the structure simple. If you can do it similar to your lit review, maybe the same as your results. Remember, it's all about the reader. Keep as simple as you can for them. Okay, trial one, seek some feedback, see how you go. Staying on track, again, just write it all. You can cull later and polish later. Keep reflecting. Keep with your evidence. You can't speculate and go outside that. Don't go off topic. No new information. Remember, I said before, whatever's in your lit review should be in your discussion as well, and vice versa. Nothing new. If you do have something new, you're going to have to go back up to your lit review and add that information in. There needs to be a clear thread all the way through. So this is the key, isn't it, to your discussion, your original and significant contribution. Don't be overwhelmed. You are one person. You will find something, I promise. So hang in there. Get your arguments really clear and persuasive. And it's okay if your insight is small. Okay, it can still be significant and it can still be new. So your discussion really needs to be then no doubt about what the answers are to your research questions. All right, so key strategy, critical analysis. What does it mean? It means examining your evidence in your discussion. Okay, you've got the evidence there to support. What does it mean? So you could restate each key finding. That could be each section potentially. But then, so you restate the finding or the result and then say what it means, and then pull it out to say how it links to the literature, which we'll look at in a minute, because that's your synthesis. And also when you're doing this critical analysis, you're learning at the same time. And once you've learned what it is and you've got it clear in your mind, you can then go ahead and tell the reader. So we're examining, we're interpreting, and we're making judgments. That's how you demonstrate your critical analysis, just like you did in the lit review, except this time you're not examining previous studies, you're examining your data. Okay, and as we said, you've got to begin to allude to the conclusions, the actions that your stakeholders are going to have to, that you're going to recommend as the implications of your research. So remember this, our planting the seeds, and I had that highlighted sentence. These figures corresponded with the results presented previously. Now this is the thread that came up in the discussion. So you can see the literature's in there, as Wingate explains. See the first sentence there? That's the writer's voice from the evidence, isn't it? Okay, then you can see the third sentence, showing interest and kindness and offering assistance are simple teaching strategies, but they can have a significant influence on new learners' feelings of belonging. Appreciation of teacher support has been reported in previous studies. So we're back to the literature again, which have shown that positive engagement with teachers is an essential part of first-year students' academic socialisation and positive student identity. So I've highlighted some key words there which would be leading towards our conclusions. Teaching strategies, so that could be recommendations that are going to be made. Positive engagements is essential for first-year students. Okay, so we're heading towards our conclusions about what first-year students need to be successful. So can you see that thread? I know it's just a couple of excerpts taken out of a study that you know nothing about, but you know everything about your study. So you're going to be able to do this. You're going to be able to have those threads, plant the seeds in the results, expand in the discussion using the literature and using your critical voice. So then the synthesis is bringing everything together. So that's your new insights, looking at how that supports, confirms, disputes the previous literature that you've gone extensively into in your lit review. And you're moving back and forth between what you found, what it means, and what previous researchers have found. So the synthesis, it's not just about the previous literature, it's pulling everything into that unified whole, which is your contribution, okay? It's your so what. So let's look even further. How are these two things different? Because they are. Critical analysis, you're pulling everything apart and you're making judgments. Synthesis, you're putting it all back together, but still making judgments, okay? So think of a paragraph. Let's go back to our example. Writer's voice from the evidence, bringing in a bit of literature as well, and starting to say, so that showing interest and kindness and offering assistance are simple teaching strategies. That's the writer's voice taken from the results. So you've got your critical analysis and your synthesis, and you're putting it all together in this discussion sections and chapter. So again, you've got to find that balance between your voice, which is your critical analysis, and your synthesis, not just the literature now, but the evidence as well. And that is leading to your so what. I talk about the so what a lot, don't I? Your so what is, why do we care? What's the contribution here? What does this mean? And you need to say that explicitly. And the discussion is where you go to do that. Then you summarize and reiterate in your conclusion, which then leads to your recommendations and your implications. So I hope all of that makes sense. It sounds hard, but really when you boil it all down, it's having that nice balance. It's the same with any of your chapters. It's having that balance where there's your voice because you are the researcher, and then using its sources in those initial chapters, using the evidence from sources to support your points and your voice. And then by the time we get to the discussion, you've now got your evidence as well to support your points and your critical analysis. Tense again. I know it's probably annoying for you, but it's annoying for me when I read incorrect tense. So as I said, simple past and simple present can never be in the same sentence. All right, it's just not grammatically possible because something can't be in the past and the present at the same time. That's why we have present perfect, have been, has shown, because that's the medium. That's something that's happening now, but it was happening in the past. Okay. Anyone interested? There's a whole sentence structure resource on Blackboard. All right, so the example here, the participants reported A and B, full stop. This suggests X and Y. So that's how we get around it, okay? This is what the evidence was, what was reported and is my evidence in past tense. This suggests, this indicates, this highlights, blah, 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 okay? And that's your interpretation. Use simple present and present perfect to compare with previous studies and add further insight. So here's our example. Although previous researchers have found, so they've found in the past, but they're still finding now, X and Y, this study provides new insights, or this study suggests contrary evidence. Okay, so there's two different ways, but notice there, two different words, but it's in present tense, right? Because you can mix present perfect with present simple. You can mix present perfect with past simple. Okay. Helpful phrases. This is from the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank, which I haven't been able to get into the last couple of days, which is a worry. I'm not quite sure why. Hopefully it'll be back up and running soon. But there's some examples there for your discussion. So this is your voice, all of these sentence starters here. Try to avoid subjective words such as interestingly, remarkably, not academic. Stick with the academic words. You can use significant, important, crucial, critical. All right, we have actually caught up. We are ready for our exemplars. So I'm going to go out of this screen and I'm going to go into the activity sheet. We've got some activities to do. We've got plenty of time. So I'm just going to go out now. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen okay, guys. Someone give me a yes. Yes, okay. Yes, if someone wouldn't mind reposting the activity sheet, I would be very grateful so that we can keep going. Otherwise, I'll have to go out of my share. If you go back through the chat, you'll see it at the beginning of the chat, though, anyone that needs it. All right, so at the beginning here, this is my little spiel about why we use exemplars and why you should engage with the exemplars. There's our two, thesis by publication, thesis by monograph. We already looked at this in the slides. All right, so we do have some questions at the end that we'll go through. But I'm just going to read through and highlight what I notice, all right? Now, I want you to understand that these are just examples. They're not perfect, but they're good, all right? If it wasn't good, I wouldn't be using it as an exemplar, all right? Now, there's things that you might disagree with and say, well, look, I wouldn't do that in mine. That's okay. You also need to remember that we haven't read the whole thesis, okay? So if from these excerpts, if we can gauge, have a good idea what's happening, then that means they've done a good job, okay? So the caveat right now is I believe these researchers have done a good job. All right, discussion and conclusion, chapter 10. So this is the first chapter the first paragraph of that chapter. Thank you, Roy, so much for posting that activity sheet. File shared function is being disabled. Okay. Let me see if I can see why. I'm not sure. Were you able to get the activity sheet okay? The other thing you guys can do is you can go back to your UniHub email because that's where it is initially as well, that activity sheet. I don't know why the shared function is disabled. Sorry. I really want to keep moving on. So let me just have a quick look. Thanks, Roy, again. Okay, hopefully you guys have got it now. All right, let's go. Anything you want to say in the chat is okay, but I won't always stop straight away because we need to get moving. All right, this chapter discusses the key results from the 3 studies and examines the key findings in consideration of the existing literature. Nice, I like it. It's in the correct tense. It needs to be in present tense because it's doing this discussing now. All right. If you say this chapter will discuss, not the end of the world, but not necessary, because why would you be using future tense? No need. I know I'm obsessed with tense. I'm an English teacher as well as a writing teacher. All right. Each study was guided, correct tense, was guided by specific aims and research questions and all contributed to the overall aim. Okay, nice. The focus of this work was CLUs, including venous leg ulcers, hope I'm saying that right, arterial and mixed. The goal of study 1 was, again, correct tense, was to identify the factors that were significantly associated with clinically diagnosed infection in adults with CLUs. Nice. These risk factors were tested for validation in phase 2 of study 2 and on and on. So that's good, giving us a reminder of what happened. This chapter first discusses the contributions to current knowledge and the conceptual framework to guide research into infection. In CLUs, the strengths and limitation of the research are also examined. I'll just make that bigger, sorry. Finally, the theoretical and practical implications for practice and future research are addressed before a series of recommendations are presented. Okay, nice. Now remember, this is the discussion and the conclusion in this chapter 10. This is good. I like it. This tense is correct. It tells us what's happening, tells us what's going to be in the chapter. Okay, then 10.1, this was the next section. There was 10.11, 10.12. I didn't include those. I jumped to 10.13. This is not the start of the section. I've pulled this from the middle of the section, okay? No specific reason. I just thought this was the best example. All right. The current research found depression, chronic pulmonary disease, and gout to be significantly associated with infected leg ulcers, indicating the importance of assessing these factors when managing patients with CLUs. Nice. Nice again. Very clear. Tells us immediately what is happening, and it's the researcher's own voice. In the discussion, or actually in any of your chapters, try to avoid starting a paragraph with a citation. Okay, use your voice. Remember, we want that nice balance between your voice and the literature and the evidence. Make that first sentence your voice. All right, so good first sentence. It is important to note that in the current research, the patient's comorbid conditions, such as depression, were identified by asking patients if they had been diagnosed with depression, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's just giving us a little bit of the information that we need to understand that the fact about depression was self-assessed, more or less. So it's a bit of a caveat, isn't it? Okay. Whilst there could be a bidirectional relationship between depression and infection, as patients with infection have a higher rate of depressive symptoms, depression has been recognised as a risk factor for infection in general. Okay, so bringing in the literature in a prospective population-based study, Anderson et al. Found something. So there's more, basically saying they're agreeing with the literature. Patients with depression also have a higher risk of developing wound infection. The significant relationship between high level of depression and healing ulcers has been noted previously in a cross-sectional study. Patients were asked to answer about their feeling in the previous week, and they used the scale. While the role and mechanism of depression on infection in chronic wounds is yet to be thoroughly investigated, depression has been found to have negative impact, right, due to association with these things and these things as well. So there's a good lot of synthesis in here, isn't there? There's a lot of previous studies that would have come from the lit review. So then we're getting into, now we're getting into the current research. It varied between 15.6 and 17%, where patients with infected leg ulcers reported higher rates of having depression compared to those without. Study 1 found depression to be significantly associated with infection 5 times, increasing 5 times. So that's from their findings. While the result from study 1 only recognized a significant association, the influence of depression was confirmed. Okay, so that's nice. That's clear. It's telling us the progression from study 1 to study 2. In which patients diagnosed with depression were found 3 times more likely to have infection right? And now look at this. This is the nice callback if we wanted to go back and have a look and find out more. This indicated, this is the interpretation, isn't it? This indicated that depression as a comorbid condition was an important risk factor. What's the aim? What are the risk factors? Depression is one. To the best of the author's knowledge, this is the first research to determine a relationship between depression and the development of infection in CLUs. So it's very clear. This is going to be the contribution, isn't it, for this section? Now, another paragraph. Chronic pulmonary disease was found to be independently significantly associated in study 1. Very clear again. This is important because it's been identified for post-operative wound infection by these authors as well, and skin and soft tissue infection. So it's adding to what we currently already know, but specifically for the CLUs. Chronic pulmonary disease is one respiratory disease that can reduce tissue perfusion or poor oxygenation of the tissue in the ulcer area. However, nice linking, the influence of chronic pulmonary disease on the likelihood of developing infection in leg ulcers did not remain significant. Okay, more evidence. The exact ability of chronic pulmonary disease to predict infection was therefore not confirmed. Okay, so there was some information there, but not enough. This may open a new area for further investigation. What's this doing? Is it's giving us our thread towards our conclusion and our future research, isn't it? So this is what I'm saying. I want you to be doing this throughout your discussion. All right. So I know I went through that very quickly, and I also know we had no idea about anything to do with this study, but we were able to get a bit of information, right? Which means the writer is doing a good job. I really think that. Maybe you don't, I don't know. I'd be interested to know what you think. Let's have a quick look at these questions. All right. Is there a reminder of the research design? What do you guys think? Do you know which sentence, if we go back up to paragraph 1? Research, we're looking for research design, research aims. What did you think? Is there a reminder about the research design? Oops, sorry, this one. Sorry for that noise. It's people coming to the door with parcels, I think, and the dogs are barking. You're saying no. What's this? Isn't that the research aim? Maybe you're saying no about the research design. I think there is some information. And then there's aim here, the goal of study 1. Research design, yeah, there's a bit in here, tested for validation. So I think yes, actually, for this one, yes, in sentence 5. Let's say sort of. Is there a reminder? Yep, definitely. Sentences 2, 4, and 5, I would say. Is there information about why this research is needed? Now that was a no for that beginning paragraph. But look, I've repeated the question here. Is there information about why the research is needed? So is there information about 2, 3, and 4? In 2, 3, and 4, is there information about why we might need it? What about this? Gives us a little bit of information, do you think? indicating the importance of assessing these factors. Okay, so remember the aims is to figure out what the factors are and what would be the ultimate implication. If you have patients presenting with an infected leg ulcer, you've got to look at all those different factors. And in this one, they're looking at the idea of the depression. Is the patient having depression? Is there chronic pulmonary disease? Now, remember, I've only pulled out a few of one excerpt. There's a whole lot of other factors as well. So is there information? I would say yes in sentence 1. Is there specific information that would have come directly from the findings? What did you think? There was quite a bit, wasn't there? Yep. So sentence 9, sentence 10, sentence 11. So I would say in here, yes, again. I would say sentences 9 to 11. Is there information leading to the research implications? I would say yes. There was this bit here. And there's this bit here. Okay. So these are all things that will be coming out into the conclusion. Let me know if you disagree, and you are allowed to disagree. So what sentences? Information leading to the implication. So sentence 19, sentence 15, and 12. 12, 15, 19. All right, now these 2 questions here are the important ones. Remember, we were saying we need to find that nice balance between critical analysis and synthesis. Now, as I was reading through, I was basically being explicit and saying, yes, they have that. Yes, they do, because there's the author's voices there. So I would say yes, and I would say yes again. There's a lot of synthesis in there. Is there critical analysis? Yes. Okay, this is critical analysis. This is critical analysis. All of this in here is our synthesis. Okay. This is all our synthesis here. So there is that nice balance, because there's the writer's voice is in there, and as well, there's the evidence from the literature. Okay, and here we're beginning to get our original and significant contribution, aren't we? All right, what do you notice about the verbs in paragraph 4? I'm on the verbs again. That's the last paragraph. Okay. Chronic pulmonary disease was found, because it was found in the past. This is an important finding because it's important now. Okay. So even though in one sentence you can't have past and present, you can jump between past and present tense in different sentences, and that's what you should be doing. Okay, this is an important finding. That's the author's critical voice. That's the analysis. It's saying, hey, this is not just a finding, it's important. Why? Because it's something that has been identified before in these kind of wounds. Therefore, it looks like it could be something that needs to be looked at for the CLUs. However, there wasn't enough information in this study, which is okay. So the exact ability is not confirmed, but it's important to have further investigation, because of the fact we can see that the synthesis is showing that other types of infections are related. Okay. So what do you notice about the verbs? When we're talking about our study, we're in past tense. When we're saying the interpretation and what it means, we're in present tense. In-text citations, what do you think? Proper APA style? Anyone want to guess? I would say 100% yes. Alphabetical order, nice semicolons, the et al is correct. So yep, all good. All right, let's have a quick look at this exemplar 2 and then we are done. Okay, chapter 9 discussion. There was an introduction with 4 paragraphs that I didn't include. This is 9.2, and that's the discussion about the self-regulated learning. This section discusses the key findings related to SRL following implementation of the COI. COI is the community of inquiry, which is what they implemented as the research design, which have been claimed to impact positively on children's self-regulation, including those with learning difficulties. Okay. COI has considerable relevance to Vygotsky. COI procedures help children think for themselves, a natural extension. Okay, so we've got some theory in here. The social interaction develops conceptual thinking, strengthening reasoning and judgment. It's a metacognitive process through which this author claims children begin to gain a greater control. This discussion seeks to identify patterns and changes that emerged within the 4 phases of the research. Okay, 3 measures were used to gather the data. Okay, that's good, reminding us about the research design. We had semi-structured interviews. We had think aloud analysis and the observations. Yeah, the 4 phases are forethought, students' ability to anticipate and plan, monitoring, involving strategies and reflection, and the ability to self-judge. Okay, so as the first paragraphs, it's set us up quite well. It's given us some theory, it's given us some background, which would have been in the lit review, but reminded us of that. And then it's reminded us how the evidence was gathered, which I think is important. For people that are having to go, that's all great. The slides are actually already on Blackboard. Okay. Okay, so then we jump to forethought. So that you can see is the first, it's one of the 4 phases. Okay, COI is credited with having the potential for developing broader and comprehensive thinking. So there's some justification of the research design. This study revealed, notice the tense, growth in self-directed thinking across the cohort. This finding links with some principal elements within the framework posited by Pintrich. And these are attributes that are often limited in children with learning difficulties. So this is good, isn't it? We've got growth in these aspects that often children with learning difficulties don't have, all right? So that's beginning the thread as to what the contribution is. So then we go into more detail about these forethought components. And again, look at the tense. The findings were positive changes. Okay, so this is the author or the researcher's voice. And then they're saying this finding is significant again. So this is really good way to structure your paragraphs. Okay. Children with learning difficulties typically show limited understanding. So the fact that they've improved, this is good. Okay. This study's findings across the participant group indicate an increased capability in planning, strategies, and forward judgment. Okay, that's a good finding. McLeod confirms metacognitive judgments of what is going to occur are made as students monitor their reading comprehension. And there's an example there that's come straight from the evidence that would have been presented in the results. And then they've pulled out a little bit of an excerpt. And they go on to explain more. Then there's some more synthesis, which is good. They appear to be founded, so there's more interpretation, which with a little bit of hedging because it's qualitative research. Okay, so you can't say they are. You need to use that hedging a little bit. And then we've got this final thing, that's final paragraph that's bringing it all together. They suggest metacognition and good judgment increased with this intervention. And it aligns with previous studies. There's our synthesis. So we've got our critical analysis there, and then we've got our synthesis there. And then there's a little sentence at the end, because remember, this is just one section. In summary, seems to have had a positive impact. So again, some hedging because it's qualitative research, but it's very clear, and this is heading towards our conclusions. So if we very quickly, is there a reminder about the research design and the research aims? Let's have a look. A little bit. There's nothing there about the aims, but remember that would have been in the introduction, okay? Probably wouldn't have hurt to say an aim in here potentially, but they definitely would have said in these 4 paragraphs above. However, there is seeks to identify patterns and changes. So there is a little bit of an aim there. Why the research is needed, not in those first paragraphs, but it is in here, okay? Because it's saying here that normally students who have these learning difficulties aren't able to be as good at the planning. However, by this intervention, there was changes in their ability to think ahead. Okay, so that's beginning to get towards implications, isn't it? Specific information from the research findings. Yes, we did find that, didn't we? Because there was excerpts from the interviews. Is there information leading to the implications? Yep, I just highlighted those. Critical analysis and synthesis. Yep, we had that nice balance of that. There was the author's or the researcher's critical voice. And then we also had the synthesis where the literature was drawn in there, aligns with previous studies, consistent with these findings. Okay, there's our evidence from the findings there. Okay, so again, even though we haven't read the whole thesis, it would help if we read the introduction, obviously here, but we didn't have the time. And I wanted to show you that balance and of having your own voice, and of course also having your synthesis in there. So bringing in the literature and bringing in what this means for your research field. So I think that this has that nice balance again. And we do have a little bit of an idea of what's happening, even though we didn't read the whole thesis. So that's a good thing. And also remember, you know, I've pulled this out of the discussion. I think if we read the introduction, we would have a little bit more of a clearer idea again. But I can get where they're going with this, most definitely. All right, so I know we went through that last one quite quickly. If you want the annotated document, please email me and I will send it through to you, no problem at all. I'm just going to stop my share for a second. Okay, so as I said, I can send you the annotated document if you email me. There's my email. Okay, I know a few people have to go. If you're still here, we've still got a few people here. Looking at the main takeaways, start now, write down everything. Even when you're analyzing the data, that's when you should be starting your writing, even if it's just dot points, draft subheadings. Keep everything clear to stay on track and make sure that your contribution is explicit in the discussion. Now, we're doing our surveys a little bit different today. I'm going to pop into the chat a link. And if you can click on that link, you can go in and fill out the survey right now. It's very quick. It's only a couple of questions. It's anonymous and it will help to make the session better next time, of course. So if you can click on that link and fill out the survey, the people that left, I'll be sending them an email. But we're just looking at doing the surveys a little bit differently to make it a little bit easier for you guys, a little bit shorter and quicker. But we can still get some good information. And let's keep going while you are doing that. This is what's coming up. We have our HDR Writers Wellbeing Lounge where you can do writing sprints and check in with your peers. That's tomorrow. And then next Tuesday, we have a HDR Writing Peer Feedback session on the 14th of July, which is next Wednesday. We've got an academic writing workshop, which just gives some basic academic writing information. It's very good if you're still wanting to improve your writing skills. And don't forget our MPhil symposiums. We have them every month. Thursday, 22nd of July is this one. And it's really nice to pop in and listen to other students and listen to their presentations about their research and their findings. It could give you some good tips. So I recommend that. So all of this information is on those HiQ research student pages. All of our resources are on Blackboard. The recording for today will go up on Blackboard as well later on today. And don't forget that update that we email to you regularly. And that is where we are finished now.